I knew something was off when Liam didn't come home until well after midnight, and even then, he didn't say a word. Just hung his jacket, set his briefcase down like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and stared out the kitchen window like he was watching a fire no one else could see. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. I'd seen that look before, twice, in fact. Once when his father died, and again when the company he worked for during the 2008 crash declared bankruptcy overnight. That hollow stillness he carried like a second skin whenever the people in charge made reckless choices and expected someone quiet like him to catch the fallout. Liam had always been the brakes, the person you barely noticed until you were going 90 on bald tires. His title at Virintech was Risk and Compliance Officer, which sounded about as exciting as watching paint dry to most folks. But the way he treated it? Like it was sacred. While the execs were off hosting innovation summits and schmoozing venture partners with those ridiculous tequila tastings, Liam was buried in addendums, digging through vendor contracts and highlighting clauses no one even remembered negotiating. There was a reason the lights never flickered, the cash never ran dry, and the auditors always left quietly, because Liam never left anything to chance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show off. He just did the damn work. And when I say work, I don't mean clicking through a checklist like some clipboard robot. I mean he read every single page of every single agreement that passed through that company, like it might be the one that blew everything up. And honestly, half the time, he was right. Real quick, before we go any further, if you're listening and haven't subscribed or hit the like button yet, do it now. I know 97% of folks don't, but it means the world to our team. Helps keep stories like this alive. Thanks for being here. Anyway, this particular Thursday night, Liam had been reviewing the Q3 compliance packet, a chunky pile of reports, sign-off sheets, and flagged items he assembled every quarter. He always did it himself. Said it helped him sleep, knowing nothing slipped through. I'd seen the rhythm of it for years. Review the payment cycles for vendors, reconcile lease commitments, cross-check credit drawdowns, and, most importantly, reconfirm authorization protocols. That last one was his obsession. There was this clause he always flagged, Section 5.2b. Sounded boring, right? All financial drawdowns and credit instruments require dual authorization from the CFO and the CRO. That's it. One line buried deep in the master bank agreement. But Liam treated that line like it was holding the roof up. Because in companies like Virintech, where everyone's rushing to scale and no one's watching the floorboards, it kind of was. He logged the clause again, cross-referenced it against the latest transaction logs. He noticed something, subtle but real. A few approvals had gone through recently without his countersignature. Not many. Just one or two. Maybe they were mistakes. Maybe someone thought it didn't apply to equipment leases or internal transfers. Still, he highlighted them, updated the deviation tracker, color-coded, red for breaches, yellow for near misses. He drafted a memo, titled it plainly, Preliminary Review Potential Violations of Section 5.2b. Attached screenshots, annotated the approval timestamps, not accusatory, not even urgent, just precise. He emailed it to legal, CC'd the CFO, and filed it under his contingency covenant risk folder, just like he always did. Then he moved on, polishing a disclosure about vendor overpayments and redrafting the language in their deferred tax obligations note. The next morning, he poured my coffee before his own, kissed my forehead, and said, "Don't let me forget to water the basil tonight." I didn't know it yet, but that was the last day he'd hold signature rights for the company. The weird part? He never mentioned it to me, not directly. He wasn't the type to whine or seek validation. But over the next week, I noticed little things. The way he stared at his computer longer than usual. How he sat a little too still in meetings on Zoom, face unreadable. I asked once, just lightly, if everything was okay at work. He shrugged. "New CEO," he said, "thinks compliance is slowing us down, wants to be faster, more agile." I raised an eyebrow. "Isn't agility how people tear their ACLs?" He smiled at that. Barely. "Yeah, and some of us are still the brakes, whether they like it or not." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I do now. The first time I saw Reed Soloway was in a grainy LinkedIn headshot. Liam forwarded me with the subject line, "New Blood." White teeth, blue blazer, 1,000-yard startup stare. The kind of guy who probably called himself a thought architect, unironically. Harvard MBA, Liam had muttered over coffee. Consulted for a fintech unicorn. Thinks culture means kombucha and cutting payroll. Reed came in hot. His second day on the job, he brought in a film crew to update the company's brand video. Wanted to elevate the narrative. That was his phrase for everything. Elevate. Elevate reporting. Elevate workflows. Elevate performance expectations. Liam joked under his breath. If he elevates any higher, he'll be orbiting the sun. But no one was laughing in the boardroom. By week 2, Reed had installed a 6-foot neon sign in the lobby that said, "Move fast, stay bold." He held standing Monday morning energy huddles, which I guess is what normal meetings become when you don't want people to sit down or ask questions. Liam didn't go to the first one, or the second. Not out of protest, just because he wasn't invited. Then came the streamline memo. That Friday, Liam came home late again, but not exhausted, just quiet. He pulled out his laptop before dinner, eyes narrowing at a forwarded email from legal. Subject: Revised authorization protocols. Immediate implementation. I watched him click through to the attached PDF, his posture going stiff before he even scrolled halfway. "Let me guess," I said, setting down his tea. "They made a bold move. They removed me from the bank's signatory list." I blinked. "Wait, what? You're the compliance officer." "Were," he said, dry as dust. "They kept the title. Cut the authority." I moved closer. "They can't legally do that, right? I mean, those clauses you're always on about." "Clause 52B, he said flatly. "Still in the agreement, still binding, but if no one enforces it..." He let the sentence trail off as he opened his folder structure, something only he could navigate. Contingency, 5.2B violations. He dropped the PDF in, renamed it Signatory Walk Change dnash.pdf, and added a version control note. No CRO signature path maintained. Potential breach exposure. "Who's Dnash?" I asked. He turned the screen toward me. There it was in crisp black and white, new sole authorized signatory, Derek Nash, SVP Strategic Development. I squinted. "Derek Nash? Isn't that..." "Reed's brother-in-law," he confirmed, tone carved from stone. "Background in consumer marketing. No finance, no compliance, but he golfs with Reed. So..." Liam didn't curse, he didn't pace or throw things. That wasn't his way. Instead, he clicked through to the original authorization archive, screenshotted the red line where his name had been struck, and saved the image to a subfolder labeled Evidentiary Snapshots. Then he closed his laptop, stood up, and asked if I wanted to go for a walk. We circled the block twice before he said anything. Then, out of nowhere, "You know what brakes do?" I glanced at him. "Stop you from crashing?" "More than that," he said. "They let you go faster safely. Without brakes, all momentum becomes risk. That's what they don't get. Reed sees compliance as drag, but without drag, you don't have lift. You have a tailspin." I'd never heard him that bitter, or that calm while saying it. The next morning, he was up early, dressed sharper than usual, same tie he wore when he testified before the state auditor 3 years ago. He packed his leather portfolio and kissed me like he was stepping into a courtroom. "You going to say anything to them?" I asked. "No," he said, "but I'm going to write everything down. If they want to fly without a parachute, I'm at least making a note of where they left it." By that evening, he drafted a new memo titled Deviation Summary, 5.2B Exposure Risk. Inside, timeline of approvals, breakdowns of dual control history, highlighted protocol conflicts, and an appendix of known compliance failures tied to unilateral decisions. He blind CA'd it to legal. No one replied. He didn't expect them to. The first time Derek Nash approved a $1 million draw without blinking, Liam didn't even flinch. He just bookmarked the transaction ID, cross-checked it against the old protocol, and logged the breach in red. Bold red. Not that anyone else would see it. They'd already stopped including him on the email threads that mattered. Derek was everything Liam wasn't. Loud, overconfident, chronically allergic to nuance. He strutted through the office like someone had dared him to play CEO in a startup-themed improv class. His signature was now on everything. Equipment leases, vendor loans, multi-year supply chain contracts. He signed fast and loose like he was ordering appetizers. One document even came back with a stray emoji next to his name. "Just keeping the vibe human," he said. Liam didn't laugh. He also didn't speak up. Not once. Not to the CFO, not to legal, not to the board liaison who used to ping him for risk thresholds and covenant clarifications. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that he did, just differently. He understood that sometimes the most damning thing you can do is document everything and say nothing. I'd watch him in the evenings, same routine, open the secure laptop, launch his encrypted spreadsheet tracker, and with this eerie calm, he'd log another violation. Date: 04.11 transaction. ID: Gr847193 nature, equipment lease, 1.2 man approver, Nash, Derek CRO. Signature: missing risk. Note: dual control breach, 5.2b. Each entry had a footnote. Each footnote had a timestamp. He didn't embellish, didn't editorialize, just the facts. Cold. Surgical. Isn't there someone you can tell? I asked one night, leaning in the doorway while he typed. I'm telling them, he said without looking up. They just don't realize it yet. He revised the memo every night that week. The file grew from 8 pages to 15, then 20. He inserted a summary table up front with color-coded risk levels: green for compliant, yellow for borderline, red for breach. By Friday, almost every row was red. He renamed the file: Deviation Summary, 5.2b Exposure Risk, final.pdf final. Not because it was over, but because he knew no one would read the next one. He sent it to legal again. Same recipients. This time he added red receipt tracking. It pinged 3 opens, one at 6:42 a.m. from legal ops, one at 9:01 a.m. from the CFO's assistant, one from a general counsel inbox in view-only mode. No one replied. That night, over dinner, he told me something that's stuck with me ever since. People think silence means apathy, he said, but sometimes it's just the sound of everything being recorded. He went back to work after that, added an appendix detailing the original signatory structure from when the credit line was first negotiated. He embedded screenshots of the lender agreement, highlighted the relevant paragraph in yellow, section 5.2b. Drawdowns require signatures from both the CFO and the chief risk officer. No exceptions. And then he did something new. He printed it. 3 copies, one for his personal records, one he sealed in an envelope marked, "If I'm removed." And the third? He didn't tell me. I only found out later where it ended up. But I remember watching him fold the papers with this deliberate precision, like someone packing a parachute no one else believed they'd need. He wasn't angry, wasn't panicked, just steady, focused. You don't think they'll fix it? I asked. He shook his head. They think speed is strategy, that risk is just a word you use to scare cautious people. And you? I think the brakes are still there. They just won't see them until the road runs out. They called it the Blitz Plan. Reed stood up in the middle of an all-hands meeting, his 4th in 2 weeks, and unveiled the blueprint like it was the Normandy invasion. Bright slides, loud music, buzzwords that made actual logistics people twitch. 3 new facilities by Q3, he announced. We scale now, or someone else eats our lunch. Derek stood behind him, arms crossed like the hype man of a mid-level motivational speaker. He called it phase-forward financing. What it actually was? A massive credit line, $24 million in rolling drawdowns from a lender out of Chicago, sliced into 7 tranches over 6 months, each one contingent on satisfactory quarterly reviews. Liam read the fine print while Reed did his LinkedIn victory lap. Clause 4.3a. Quarterly covenant compliance must be certified by both CFO and CRO prior to subsequent disbursements. That alone should have stopped them in their tracks. It didn't, because Reed, bless him, thought certifications were just paperwork. And Derek? He was too busy signing vendor agreements with companies whose names he couldn't pronounce. By the end of the week, 2 draws had already cleared. Nearly $5.5 million approved, disbursed, and halfway spent on equipment Liam hadn't even seen specs for. He'd noticed it by accident, cross-checking a vendor onboarding doc with a shipping invoice that hadn't hit the approval queue. Pre-approval logistics, Derek had said, like that was a thing. And Liam did what Liam always did. He logged it, he color-coded it, he updated the memo. But this time, he didn't stick around to watch it get ignored. On Monday morning, he booked PTO 5 days, first time in 2 years. No beach, no travel, just time. When I asked him why now, he just said, "You don't argue with a storm when you've already boarded up the windows." Before he logged out that afternoon, he forwarded the updated deviation summary. 5.2b exposure risk to the full legal distro. This version had something new, a timeline header at the top of every page. Date, time, approver, nature of transaction, risk rating, highlighted section references. He even included a one-page executive summary titled Non-Compliance Exposure Active Covenant Breach Potential. He blind CC'd a private email, not his own. Then he set his out of office. It was one line longer than usual. I am currently on PTO and unavailable until 04/22. For issues involving bank agreements or transaction authorization, refer to Authorization Clause 5.2b in the Master Credit Line terms. I asked if he really expected anyone to read that far. They won't, he said, but it'll be in the record when someone asks why no one saw it coming. He stepped out that evening lighter than I'd seen him in months. We had dinner at the little Italian place downtown. No phones, no spreadsheets, no muttered acronyms over appetizers. Just wine and silence and one small smile I hadn't seen since the new CEO arrived. But back in the office, that's when the cracks started whispering through the halls. It began as a rumor that the Q2 financials hadn't been fully certified before the latest draw, that the bank had emailed legal asking for the quarterly review paperwork. Twice. That someone in finance tried to recreate Liam's old certification report, but couldn't find the templates. Then there were the Slack messages, screenshots forwarded to Liam from an old friend in AR. Does anyone know where the CRO sign-off doc lives? Wait, do we still have a KRO? Can Derek sign for risk? Reed says we're fine. Just push it through. And beneath it all, silence. Not legal silence, not passive-aggressive silence, just Liam's silence. No replies, no updates, just a folder on the shared drive that hadn't been touched in a week. A quiet little placeholder titled Mandatory Dual Sign-Off Compliance, Live. Most didn't even know it existed, but the bank did, and they were about to ask a very specific question. It was supposed to be routine. A $2.8 million draw, third in the sequence earmarked for retrofitting the West plant and prepaying a materials order from a Taiwanese supplier Derek couldn't even spell. Finance queued it up like the others, dropped Derek's digital signature, and hit send. And then, nothing. 4 hours passed, then 8. Then came the email, short, cold, and terrifying in its precision. Disbursement hold, April 22nd draw request. Authorization incomplete, missing dual sign-off per Master Credit Agreement Clause 5.2b. Derek's Slack messages to the lender went unanswered. He marched down to legal like a man storming a castle and demanded someone get Wells Fargo on the phone and explain this is a legacy requirement. Reed, who was still at a conference in Denver grinning in front of fiber optic display booths and half-empty champagne flutes, FaceTimed into the crisis call like a bored influencer. "It's a minor formality," he said, waving a hand at the screen. "They just need reassurance we're operationally aligned. Someone shoot over the updated signatory doc." Legal froze. Because there was no updated signatory doc. There was only the old one. And it had Liam's name on it. Except now, thanks to Reed's streamlining, Liam's name had been very literally crossed out. Not redacted. Not formally amended through the bank's channel. Just struck. Like someone printed the PDF, grabbed a pen, and drew a big confident line through the one signature field the agreement explicitly labeled non-waivable. That was the moment panic stopped being internal, because the bank's compliance officer emailed back a scanned copy of that very page, with one line below it, "Authorization invalid. Contact your risk officer." No one responded, because no one could. By noon, Reed had rerouted his flight. Derek had stopped talking. Legal had pulled 2 paralegals from unrelated projects to comb through old risk memos looking for a loophole. There wasn't one. The CFO, Janessa, finally broke the silence in the emergency Zoom that followed. "Why was risk removed from the authorization protocol?" she asked flatly. No one answered. She looked around the virtual room, boxed faces, blinking avatars, someone breathing too close to a mic. "Because I don't remember approving that. And if it wasn't through me and it wasn't through the bank. Her voice trailed off. Reed snapped back in. We need to fix this. Now, send them an updated authorization sheet. Retroactive. Legal's junior counsel cleared his throat. We can't. That clause requires active, pre-signed dual authorization. There's no retroactive path. Then we reinstate Liam, Derek said quickly. Right? Just get him back in the seat. Have him sign. But legal was already shaking their heads. He's on PTO, and reinstatement would require formal documentation, a resolution, a 10-day banking window, and lender acknowledgement. We can't just paste his name back in. That's when it hit them. No one knew where Liam was. His out of office was still up. No forwarding number, no calendar holds. Just that one damn line. For issues involving bank agreements, refer to Authorization Clause 5.2b. And then, right on cue, came the second email from the bank. Subject: Escalation, pending disbursement review. Attached: Revised compliance snapshot, client profile, Virion Tech. As of latest documentation, no valid risk officer signature on file. Draw request placed on indefinite hold pending verification. Attached to the email was a PDF. Page 1, the original signatory chart. Page 2, Liam's name, line drawn through it. Page 3, a yellow sticky note scanned into the corner, added by someone on the bank's side. It read, Client removed mandatory signatory without amendment protocol. Please confirm if client understands this voids authorization rights under Section 5.2b. When Reed read that line, he looked like a man realizing the parachute cord had snapped mid-jump. No one knew what to say. So they just stared at the screen, at the crossed-out name, at the empty line where Liam Turner used to be. They tried everything but admitting they were wrong. Monday morning started with Reed storming through the executive floor like a man auditioning for a meltdown. First stop, legal. He slammed his hand on a conference table and barked, "Fix it." No subject, no explanation needed. They already knew. He wanted the clause gone, the draw unpaused, and the banker satisfied. We can't fix a clause, Reed, said Tara, Legal's VP of Compliance. It's not a Google Doc. Derek, who had finally shed the last of his bravado, hovered behind Reed like a ghost of bad decisions. What if we just, recreated the signature, like backdate it, add Liam's signature to the doc, just enough to get this past the review, then we formally reinstate him and clean it up after. That was the moment Tara pushed back from the table, slowly, deliberately, like distance alone might protect her from the legal fallout that idea would summon. Are you suggesting we forge a signature on a federal banking instrument? Derek blinked. Not forge, just replicate, like he would have signed it. You're out of your depth, she said, standing now, and if anyone hears you say that again, I'll be forced to report it externally. The room went silent. Reed tried calling Liam, twice, then 3 more times, then through an old HR contact. No answer, no voicemail, just that same calm auto-reply with its now haunting sentence about Clause 5.2b. Next, they tried emailing from the CFO's account. A softly worded message, no demands, just a, hey, if you're available, could use your signature for something minor. Liam didn't respond. At 3:42 p.m., Reed called an emergency board session. By now, everyone knew the expansion was on pause. Contractors were sitting idle. Purchase orders were held in limbo. The Taiwanese supplier threatened to divert inventory to a competitor if prepayment didn't arrive within 72 hours. Who let this happen? One board member demanded. Did no one read the original agreement? No one answered. Someone pulled up the PDF on a projector screen. The room dimmed as the document loaded, black and white and brutally clear. Master Credit Agreement, Dual Control Signatory Terms, Section 5.2b. All drawdown requests shall require active, non-delegable contemporaneous signatures from the acting chief financial officer and the chief risk officer. Signatures must be on file at the time of request. This clause is binding and non-waivable without written lender amendment. Non-waivable, Tara said quietly. I thought that language was standard, Reed replied, looking paler now. Everyone signs these things. Yes, she said, and everyone reads them. Or was supposed to. Just then, the banker arrived. She wasn't smiling. Maria Heller, Vice President of Corporate Lending, 12 years with the firm, zero patience for corporate theatrics, walked in with a single folder and a copy of the original agreement. No small talk, no delay. I'm here to formally notify the board that your disbursement privileges are suspended pending resolution of a compliance breach, as stipulated in Clause 52B. She held up the folder. This is your original signed agreement. These are your draw histories. These, she added, sliding forward the latest request, are your missing authorizations. She flipped to the final page. And this, she said, tapping it once, is where your risk officer was supposed to sign, but cannot, because you removed him, without process, without filing, without amendment. Reed opened his mouth. Don't, Maria said flatly. I've heard every excuse, every version of we thought it didn't matter. I'm not here for rationalizations. I'm here because you breached a clause you didn't write but did agree to, and now you have no one authorized to sign for risk. One of the board members muttered, He's not even in the building. Reed's face twitched. We're working on reinstating him. Can we get provisional approval until then? Maria shook her head. This isn't a neighborhood bank. There's no such thing as provisional on a covenant clause. You either meet the terms or you don't. You don't. She packed her folder, stood up, and looked around the room. I'd suggest figuring out who your risk officer actually is, because right now, you don't have one. She walked out. The room stayed silent. Outside, Derek sat slumped in a hallway chair, staring at his phone, still hoping for a reply that wouldn't come. Reed didn't look at him. He didn't look at anyone. Because now, finally, he understood what Liam had meant all along. The breaks weren't advisory. They were the last thing between control and collapse. It was an intern who found it. 2 days into the freeze, with drawdowns still locked and expansion plans on ice, legal ran out of excuses. Tara, exhausted and practically whispering orders at that point, assigned everyone in the department to scour the compliance archive for anything that referenced 5.2b. Most were looking for loopholes. What they found instead was Liam's voice, quiet, methodical, and entirely ignored. A junior legal assistant named Maya was deep in the subfolders when she stumbled across it. A PDF labeled Deviation Summary, 5.2b, Exposure Risk, Final. She clicked it open. First page, a red banner at the top that read, Urgent, for immediate review. Second page, a table itemized by date, amount, and signature status, meticulously cross-referenced to bank agreement clauses. Third page, full redline edits on the original signatory policy with annotations in the margins. No active dual signature present. Risk exposure elevated to default trigger. And at the bottom of every single page in the footer, one line repeated over and over like a drumbeat. Without active risk officer countersignature, all drawdowns may be void. Maya printed it, handed it to Tara. Tara handed it to Reed. He didn't finish reading it. He just stood there in the middle of the room, paper dangling in his hand like it might burn him. When did he send this? First time, 3 weeks ago, Tara said. Final version was resent the day he went on PTO. Reed ran a hand over his mouth. Was it opened? No, she said. Never even registered a read receipt. The board was briefed again. This time, no one interrupted. No one rolled their eyes. Because there, in print, in plain English, was the clause everyone thought was decorative, rendered fatal in Liam's red ink. That afternoon, the banker returned. Maria walked into the boardroom with a smaller folder this time. One document. One goal, closure, not comfort. We received your internal memo from Mr. Turner, she said, placing the printed summary gently on the table. Had we seen this at the time of submission, it would have triggered a precautionary review and likely prevented your current situation. Derek, somehow still allowed in the room, stepped forward and pulled a pen from his jacket. I can sign it now, he said, gesturing to the draw form. I've got risk oversight in my title, SVP Strategic Dev and Risk Expansion. Maria didn't even blink. You're not a recognized risk officer on file with the lending institution, she said, but I oversee... She cut him off. You were granted signatory authority without formal amendment to the credit line. That in itself is under review. What you cannot do is pretend to be a risk officer in a jurisdiction where the term is regulated. This isn't optional. This isn't improv. Derek looked down, lips parting, then closing again. Slowly, he stepped back. Maria turned to Tara. "Where is Mr. Turner now?" Tara swallowed. "We don't know." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Has anyone asked?" Reed cleared his throat. "We've reached out." Maria nodded slowly. "That's not what I asked." No one spoke. The silence stretched. Then Maria sighed. "This clause, 5.2b, it's not a decorative piece of legal language. It's the handbrake. It's there so that when people start making expensive decisions too quickly, someone has to sit beside them with a second key. Your company removed that key, and now you don't have brakes." She stood, gathered her folder, and before leaving said only this: "Let us know when you find Mr. Turner. Until then, our position is unchanged." The door clicked shut behind her. Outside the boardroom, Liam's desk sat untouched. A single chair, empty. In his inbox, the final email from legal, opened too late, sat marked unread. Not by him, by everyone else. By Thursday, Reed had dropped the act. The blazer was gone, the sleeves rolled up. The voice that once boomed across investor calls now cracked like an overloaded speaker. He sat across from the bank's lead counsel in a hastily rescheduled Zoom call, blinking too often, smiling too wide, trying to do what he'd always done: spin the narrative. "We just need a path forward," he said, voice tight. "Something provisional, a waiver, a carve-out. We'll fix it on our end, but right now we're weeks into a build and the contractor is threatening to walk if they don't get paid by Friday." The banker didn't even look tired, just unmoved. "You terminated the dual control structure," she replied. "We didn't." Reed opened his mouth, closed it again. His face was a study in someone realizing that charm had an expiration date, and it had already passed. The board, now fully looped in and fracturing internally, began firing off suggestions in a last-ditch effort to reclaim stability. "Can't we just reinstate Liam?" Janessa, the CFO, asked. "Even temporarily?" Legal shook their heads. "Not under our current compliance policies. Once CRO credentials lapse, reinstatement requires full vetting, background checks, role audits, third-party verification, 90 days minimum." 90 days? Reed barked. "We'll be dead in 90 days. A long silence followed. Then, softly, "You were told," Tara said. "More than once." The next draw, $3.2 million, meant to cover 2 overseas shipments and 40% of the retrofitting costs, was officially canceled by close of business. Vendors paused delivery. Construction halted mid-frame. A drone footage reel from the flagship expansion site showed forklifts parked at odd angles, concrete mixers sitting idle, scaffolding hanging like half-finished ambition. The company Slack turned quiet. Real quiet. Then came the ripple effects. Finance froze discretionary spending. Bonuses, already soft promised during Reed's last town hall, were quietly deferred pending further notice. Internal hiring paused. Travel approvals revoked. Every shiny perk Reed had used to paint the new vision suddenly looked like someone had taken a blowtorch to the brochure. Morale didn't drop. It cracked. And still, Liam said nothing. His chair remained empty. His inbox untouched. His last sent email, the one with the highlighted clause and the final red lines, had now been printed, annotated, and circulated across 3 departments. Every executive now carried a copy, the way someone carries an evacuation plan after the fire's already started. Even Derek, sunburnt, sleepless Derek, stopped offering ideas. I saw it all unfold from home. Liam didn't check the news, but I did. I read the trade publication headline: Viriontech expansion paused after authorization conflict. Risk officer missing. They made it sound like he disappeared. But Liam didn't disappear. He'd been right there the entire time. The truth was simpler. They just never looked. And Reed? For all his noise, all his confidence, all his commanding presence, he was finally forced to reckon with the one thing he never accounted for. The authority he wielded was never total. It just looked like it. until the paper said otherwise. The room was already quiet before Maria Heller spoke, but when she placed the signed credit agreement on the polished wood table and slid it toward the board, the silence turned surgical. Everyone leaned forward. The pages rustled faintly. You could hear the breath catch in Janessa's throat as she read the line. Risk officer signature, required. Below it, nothing. Just a thin gray line, waiting, empty. She looked up at Reed, who looked like a balloon that had lost just enough air to stop floating. His tie was askew, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. Can we? He started to ask, voice so quiet it sounded borrowed. Maria didn't even lift her eyes. No, there is no active risk officer on record. Until there is, the clause is unmet. Someone, maybe legal, maybe an outside advisor, tried to whisper something about interim solutions, about temporary resolutions, about negotiated grace periods. Maria simply tapped her pen on the signature field. Not a suggestion, she said. A requirement. You don't get partial compliance. Either the field is signed by a recognized, vetted, authorized risk officer, or your expansion funds remain frozen. That's the agreement. That's your agreement. Reed didn't speak again. He didn't have to, because the damage was done. Every person in that room knew what had happened. Not through some dramatic discovery, not through whistleblowers or leaked emails or panicked depositions. No, just paper. Paper they didn't read. Terms they didn't think applied to them. A clause they thought could be ignored. And one man, quiet, meticulous, maddeningly precise, who followed every rule they couldn't be bothered to remember. Outside that glass-walled boardroom, Liam Turner sat on a park bench 2 blocks away, a black coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. He wasn't watching the fallout. He didn't need to. He already knew how it would end. He'd spent the morning ignoring calls, letting voicemails pile up, one after another from numbers he recognized but had no desire to answer. A few from Reed, one from Derek, rushed, apologetic, tone-deaf. He deleted it without listening to the end. But then, one message stood out. A direct LinkedIn message from a firm in Boston, Global Advisory, Tier 1. Heard what happened at Virion Tech. Your memo was impressive. We value foresight. Let's talk. Liam stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. Not smug, not bitter, just clear. He didn't reply right away. He closed the app, took another sip of coffee, let the wind pass over him. Back in the boardroom, the final version of the agreement remained on the table, signed by the CFO, endorsed by legal, stamped by the lender. And still, that one field stayed blank. No one could fill it, because the only person who could had already walked away, not in anger, not for revenge, but because when you remove the brakes, you don't ask the road to forgive you. You just hope the crash doesn't kill the company. Liam never looked back. He didn't need to, because in the end, turns out streamlining approvals only works when you don't delete the brakes.